Hi, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to Girlhood Movie Database. I messed it up.
What did you say?
I said data case.
Oh.
It might not have even been obvious because both of us were speaking, but I noticed that I did it and then I stumbled.
Okay. Hi, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to Girlhood Movie Database, a podcast where we deconstruct and muse on depictions of girlhood in film, literature, and other media.
A pop culture celebration of the audacity of youth. What the fuck? Okay.
I swear this is not a bit to whoever's listening.
Okay, I got it. Sorry. A feminist celebration of pop culture, the audacity of youth, and the ways we grow away from and into our bodies, beliefs, and dreams for ourselves and each other.
And today we are discussing
Wuthering Heights.
in scare quotes. That is technically part of the title, I believe,
Yes.
are the quotation marks.
Mhm.
Wuthering Heights, 2026, directed by Emerald Fennell, director of Promising Young Woman, a movie that I think, Maggie, you like. I still haven't seen it.
It's despite all the things I'm about to say today, you should still go see Promising Young Woman. It's really like 10/10, no notes. It's a really good film.
Okay. Also director of Saltburn, which we have discussed before on this podcast. Maggie is more pro than I am. This movie version of Wuthering Heights was also written by Emerald Fennell. It is technically, perhaps in name only, really based on Emily Bronte's 1847 novel of the same name. It was released February 13th, 2026. Just a week ago. We're coming to you fresh. We are in the cultural moment here this week. And for the poster tagline, short, not necessarily sweet. Do you remember what it is? Because it was all over the marketing. Maggie's shaking her head.
I think I avoided a lot of marketing for this as much as I could.
I did too, because I was hearing glimmers of things about how the press tour was kind of insane. But I was like, I don't need to know about that. However, my favorite movie theater is a small local theater. And one of the reasons I love them is that they only show 2 or 3 trailers before their movies. So they respect my time. But the one downside of that is sometimes I see the same trailer before every single movie I see there. So for the past 2 or 3 months, I've been seeing the Wuthering Heights trailer. Because they're just like, we're going to be showing this. The people will be coming. So here's the trailer for it. So I've seen the trailer a lot. But that was the only extent of my marketing exposure to it. Anyways, none of this is really relevant. The poster tagline is, da-da-da-da, come undone.
Yeah, I have no memories of seeing this anywhere. Is it on the poster?
Yes.
On the movie poster?
Yes.
I just didn't pay attention to it. I think the film poster is beautiful.
It is.
I really love how, like, and she is obviously like harkening back to like old Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. It's very Gone with the Wind, the way their heads are configured.
Yeah.
The poster strikes a tone that shows up at the beginning of this movie and then disappears, I would argue.
I would argue that happens with many things. Or at least more than one.
What? And I'm so excited to hear those arguments, by the way. Before we get into that, though,
I'm just like so excited. I'm like laughing. Like I can't wait.
No, I want this to be good vibes.
Yeah.
Even if it's us being confounded the whole time, it's going to be good vibes. Would you do us the honor of reading the log line for this Wuthering Heights adaptation? Thank you.
What the tragedy strikes. Sorry. I think I went in too strong. Try again. Tragedy strikes when Heathcliff falls in love with Catherine Earnshaw, a woman from a wealthy family in 18th century England. Well, I mean, it's real bare bones.
Yeah.
Tragedy strikes when Heathcliff falls in love.
Thing that is most interesting to me about this, despite it being very basic, is that it kind of posits Heathcliff as the main character, when I do think the movie is really all about Kathy. So I don't have anything super intellectual or thoughtful to say about that, but I'm like, that's interesting in the way that sentence is structured, that Heathcliff feels more central. It's about what is happening to him.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Which maybe that is related to how this movie renders his character and seems to gaze upon him. Obviously, this movie is deeply unserious.
It's so like...
I'm going to provide a very brief synopsis of what happens in this movie, because the plot really, like, you can kind of go through it point by point and it doesn't require a lot of nuanced explanations of things. So we meet Kathy Earnshaw when she is a child. She's watching a public hanging and has this look of ecstasy on her face as it's happening. And so immediately I'm going to editorialize a little bit as I'm going through this. I was like, oh, so she's psycho. That was my immediate reaction. I was like, okay, she's kind of unhinged. Interesting. And she is there with her hired companion, who is a girl named Nellie. And Kathy goes home to this dark, gloomy, creaky estate called Wuthering Heights. And it's in the Yorkshire moors. And her father is a drunk and a gambler. And one night when he's at the bar, he finds this orphan child and brings him home and is like, we are going to take care of him now. And Kathy declares that he shall be her pet. And she names him Heathcliff. And because there's no one else fucking around, because they live in the middle of nowhere, they become inseparable. They spend a lot of time together. They clearly have this youthful affection for each other. Kathy's dad is a bad person. He abuses Heathcliff physically. And it's not a happy childhood by any means. And then they eventually grow up into young adults. They're both still living at Wuthering Heights, which has fallen into greater disrepair because the dad is gambling away all the money. And these new neighbors arrive named the Lintons, and Kathy is all eager to have them call upon her because she's like, oh, well, maybe I can marry that guy. His name is Edgar Linton, and he will save me from my troubles because then I will have a life of comfort and luxury, while also at the same time, she and Heathcliff are in love with each other. And so she's torn between what is the socially, economically aspirational choice versus what is the choice that my heart wants. And she ultimately decides she's going to marry Edgar and accept a life of luxury. And Heathcliff overhears her having this conversation with Nellie when she talks about accepting Edgar's proposal, and he hears her say that it would degrade her to marry him. So he, without any communication, just flees, disappears for years. Kathy gets married. She's sad. Even though her husband seems like a fine person, Heathcliff comes back. He's suddenly rich, and he cut his hair and shaved his beard. And he got a gold tooth to cover his missing tooth. And then they start fucking. They reunite. Kathy's dad dies. They reunite romantically. They start having this secret affair, while at the same time, Kathy is pregnant with her husband's child. And then she eventually tries to end things with Heathcliff, and he gets mad, and he marries this woman named Isabella, who is Edgar's ward, to make Kathy jealous. And then Kathy dies. And there are specifics involving her death, but I don't care to get into them because they're kind of uninteresting to me. And then Heathcliff comes back and he cries over her dead body at the end.
Yeah. And okay, wait, hold on. Well, I don't have to say that yet, but I need to say it. I need to note here that I must say something later about that.
About him clasping her dead body? Or just the ending?
I mean, I guess I could say it. No, I feel like I can't say it yet.
Okay. Did I miss anything? I saw this movie a week ago and I'm already like, there are so many details I don't remember.
No, I don't think so. I feel like I assumed that Isabella was Edgar's sister.
Well, she is in the book, and in the movie
they say that she's not.
They explicitly say that she's his ward. Literally. So I don't know how he acquired her as a ward, or whatever, but because they changed that character a lot, the Isabella character a lot, and they totally nix Kathy having a brother.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get into the movie, I wondered if it would be helpful for us to first share what pre-existing relationship we had with the novel.
Yeah.
Would you like to go first?
Sure. I think that I was introduced to it in high school, but my high school time was a wild, difficult time. So a lot of things are like lost to me. But as I was reading it last year, I was like, this is so familiar to me. But as with a lot of classic novels, and when you are someone who likes to hang out in like literary circles because you're a writer, I think sometimes those classics, the essence of them, and certainly the plot and cultural impact of them, you just sort of pick up on through like osmosis. So I genuinely couldn't tell you if I had directly read this novel before last year. I imagine so, but I taught it relatively recently, and I quite like it. It's dark, it's strange, it's confusing, it's violent. It's really wonderfully gothic. And Emily was such a weirdo in a beautiful way. And part of how I sell this novel to my students is talking about the post-mortem drama of how Charlotte talked about her sister and was kind of like, she was a little off. So I had to make some edits here, and we don't really have some of the original drafts that Emily would have created for the novel because she had an older sister who was like, don't look at this. Nobody needs to see this weird shit. That's like a pretty reductive way of describing, I'm sure, their relationship and what that actually looks like if there's like a scholar listening to the show for some reason, a Brontë scholar listening to this. That's my interpretation as a non-scholar of the Brontë sisters. But nevertheless, this novel is pretty dear to my heart, I would say, overall.
Nice. I did not read it in high school, which I think was probably good. I sometimes wonder, I don't know, it's fascinating to me that it is so prevalent in high school curriculum. Not because I think people of that age aren't intelligent enough to understand it or gain meaning from it. It's just, it's such an adult book. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, though. I did not read it until my senior year of undergrad when I was 22 because I was in a Brontë seminar for my senior capstone for my English major. So we read Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, and Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. And I wrote a 20-page critical essay on self-imposed starvation as religious worship in Wuthering Heights. So there was a whole 4-month period where it was Wuthering Heights was just in my brain all the time, and I was always thinking about it. And I think it's a very intriguing, profane, miserable, propulsive, it's quite the page turner novel. But even when I was reading it at that age and was doing this very in-depth work in relation to it, I feel like I respected it more than I loved it. As far as the canon of classic literature goes, or even just classic British literature goes, it was never one that was nestled in my heart as much as other books. I'd never seen a film adaptation of it until watching this movie. So I didn't reread it before watching it. So I didn't have, obviously there were things going into it where it's like, okay, this is going to be different than it was in the book, but I didn't feel precious about the book going into it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But then that leads to our sort of origin story relationship to this film, which is very new for everyone in the world right now. So Maggie, I would love to.
I actually do have kind of a story. And I do want to add that even though I quite like the novel, I went into this movie being like, okay, expectations are that this is not necessarily based on the novel. I have my bias, sure. But I really intentionally went into the watching of this film thinking I'm not going to judge it based on my relationship with the book. As much as anyone can do that, right? So I just feel like that's important to say. Okay, so this is what I'm thinking as I'm walking into the theater. Let this be its own art. Okay. Now, Maren knows, and if anyone listening to this that knows me, you will know as well that I'm often like a little bit late to things. Like I just have a lot going on. I'm also just kind of like type B about being on time, generally speaking. And so I had my lover, I was like, okay, you need to just like park the car and then just drop me off at the door. Cause I was like, I need to see this whole thing. We're recording a podcast about it. I mean, I didn't miss anything technically, but I walk in to the hanging scene, which we all did. But I walked in at that moment and I was like, holy shit, am I like a lot later than I was? It was very disorienting. I was like, oh my God, what have I missed? I didn't actually miss anything. Now I've gathered, because I walk in with Kathy being horrified and the hanging and the erection.
The hanging corpse has an erection.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm not a scientist, but I do believe like it's common to get an erection when you die. So I'm assuming that was just like a natural biological response that was being emphasized into a form of eroticism. And I just sort of stood there and was like, fuck. And in that fuck was confusion, disappointment, and a reminder that I had to keep an open mind. Disappointment in that I was already like, what the fuck is the point of this? And I was like, if this is like meant to set the tone of the movie, then maybe we're going to have a great fucking time here. You know?
Generally, overall, though, did you have a great fucking time?
I had an okay time, actually.
Okay.
I thought that I was going to have a really good time watching it, and I didn't. But I also wasn't like, I hate this. This is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, which I was surprised by that response, actually.
Because you thought you were going to have a great time. Is that what you...
Yeah, I thought that I was going to have
okay.
a lot of fun watching it. Yeah, regardless of my criticisms.
Okay. I love hearing this. I too went into the movie just assuming it was going to be a radical departure from the source material. That was just obvious to me when the casting was announced for this movie, and it was like, okay, you're immediately ignoring the racial politics of this book. So I was like, yeah, whatever the fuck this is going to be is what it's going to be. So I just have to take it on those terms. And I felt confident in my ability to judge it on its own terms. I do. Okay, now I'm gonna dwell on the hanging scene a little bit, because opening the movie in that way immediately put me on its side. I was like, this is interesting. We're conflating sex and death, and it's immediately murky. And if this movie is going to be as erotic as it is trying to convince people it's going to be in its marketing, then this might be interesting. And the theater I was in has very good sound, And I've had this experience before in that theater where the way the speakers are, like certain sounds come from behind you, are isolated to come from the back of the theater. And the movie opens, maybe you missed this, it opens with a black screen and you hear the sound of the rope against the wood, but you don't see it yet. And so my first thought was that it was the squeaking of a bed and two people having sex. And I feel like it's very deliberately designed to be ambiguous that way. But then you kind of hear this sputtering and coughing, or like someone is struggling to breathe. And at first I didn't even check that it was the movie. I thought someone behind me was like choking on their soda. So I literally turned around because I thought someone sitting behind me was having a medical issue. And I'm like, oh wait, no, that's the movie. And the text on screen with the production names and stuff was vibrating a little bit. So it was sort of mimicking this, the bed is squeaking because people are having sex vibe. And then you finally see it and it's a guy getting executed. And just that immediate sensorial disorientation, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And this feels very intentional and thoughtful. And like, we're on track to actually be saying things. Maggie is grimacing. So watching it then, thenceforth, after what I think is a strong opening scene, it just produced this really confusing experience for me personally as a viewer, because I was rarely bored while watching it. This movie is 2 hours and 15 minutes long or something. It's a long movie. And I rarely felt that runtime. But at the same time, there is an exact moment, which I will get into later, where I think its momentum absolutely craters and the emotional logic of the characters falls apart, and it never mends itself. It never comes back from that. There are certain images that I still remember because they're technically composed in this striking or strange way. But when I try to think about what they are conveying to me emotionally or thematically, I have nothing. Like, I can remember what they are, but beyond that, they're just empty to me. And I did fucking tear up at the very end, but then was immediately annoyed that I was tearing up because I was like, this movie didn't earn this. I don't buy whatever sincerity it's trying to convey in this ending, but I'm also not entirely immune to it. So I'm ultimately mixed to negative on the movie as a whole because I don't think it succeeds at what it's trying to be, which is this tragic love story. But when I think back to like individual bits, there were some that were really effective to me. And so I'm confused. But ultimately, I don't think I don't think it's great.
Yeah.
And then this is where the book comes back in. Can I say one more thing? I think that it's not successful at trying to be its own thing separate from the book, which is this tragic love story, which is really that's not what the book is. But because it's unsuccessful at rising to the occasion as its own thing, that reignited my curiosity about the novel. So I immediately went home and started rereading the novel, and I have since reread it. And now I feel like I have to compare it to the novel in order to fully form some of my critiques, even though my initial intention was to not compare it to the novel. So that's where I'm at.
I think we had a similar response overall to this movie. And just going off the last thing you said, I think that's the issue, right? Is like, I wanted to engage with this work as its own thing, as its own artistic endeavor. But I find it wanting and failing in so many ways that I can't really approach it that way.
Right, because it in trying to be its own thing, it ended up being the most superficial version of the type of love story it's trying to tell, that to try to take it on its own terms, I would have nothing really to say.
Yeah.
So I have to use the novel as a point of comparison. Like it's such a failure as its own work that the only way to make it interesting is to compare it to the novel, in which it practically bears no resemblance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my origin story, when I said I was like disappointed at that in the beginning, is I just had a sense, I was really intrigued in that opening scene. My disappointment was fear that it would not rise to the occasion of that moment, I think, was part of it, because this would have been a really fun, exciting, engaging film all the way through for me if it understood its own energy that it was bringing in those first few moments. And I don't think that it does. Also, because I'm me, I watched, and I had seen Andrea Arnold's 2011 adaptation of Wuthering Heights at some point. It came out in 2011, so it would have been a long time ago. And so I watched it. It's free on Tubi right now if anybody wants to check it out. I will sometimes like watch half of a movie and then stop and then watch the rest of it later. So I did that. I watched like the first half of it, and then of Andrea Arnold's 2011 Wuthering Heights adaptation, went and watched this one, and then finished her adaptation, watching it afterwards. And it was more or less like watching it for the first time because it had been so long. And that also definitely impact, because oh my God, the Andrea Arnold's adaptation is fucking beautifully done. It understands those characters. It understands characterization, period. Is what I mean to say, actually. You could argue, I think that it's basically a character study of Heathcliff.
Okay, can I?
Yeah.
Okay. I have still never seen that version, and I considered watching it to prepare for this episode, but then I was like, no, I feel like it's way better than the Emerald Fennell version, and then that's just gonna derail me. But a film critic whose work I quite like, his name is Bilga Elbiri. He writes for Vulture. He just did an article or project where he watched like 40 adaptations of Wuthering Heights and ranked them. And he ranked the Andrea Arnold version very highly. And that was something that he said in it, was that it feels like the one adaptation that really helps you as the viewer grasp what it feels like to be Heathcliff. And I thought that was really, really interesting.
It's also, well, I don't know all of the adaptations of Wuthering Heights, but most of them, Heathcliff is cast as a white man.
Right.
And that is the only one that I'm aware of. I don't know that it's the only one. I don't think it is, because
Well, something that the article gets into is that he watched a bunch of non-US, UK versions. There's ones from the Philippines and Japan. So in that sense, it's like, oh, well, everyone is Japanese or Filipino or whatever and not white. But my understanding is that as far as the American and British versions, hers is the only one where Heathcliff is explicitly not white.
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying. But it is the only one that I know of where the Heathcliff character is not white and is played by a black actor. I wrote their names down because I do think that their performances were really good too, which I didn't mean to get into all this right now. James Housen played the adult version of Heathcliff, and Solomon Grave played the child version of Heathcliff in that adaptation. And what's interesting too about that film is that it, in the way that I think, I don't remember what I was saying. I was saying something else.
We were talking about how it understands Heathcliff's characterization and understands characterization, period.
That was a little foreshadowing.
And the characterization in this movie is so confounding. I feel like I'm going to use the phrase emotional logic a bunch, which I'm sorry if that sounds pretentious and I overuse it, but there is none, I find.
Mm-mm.
So you were talking about that. I don't know. Just having seen Andrea Arnold's other films, I would assume that there's a lot of attention paid to the earth and the atmosphere in it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember where I was going with that, because it was a long way around, but I was actually responding to something you said where you said that you were engaged the whole time, and I wasn't. I was like, get me out of here. Get me out of here. I was actually checking my watch. I don't really do that. Especially when I go to the theater. I knew about how long it was. And I was like, how much fucking longer do we have to sit inside this constant, lacking in variation, emotional tone with Charlie XCX's soundtrack in the background almost the entire fucking time? There was like no reprieve. And I would love to say that was emulating the sort of, constant dread of the story and of the miserable nature of their lives and the isolation of the Moors. But I think it was just poorly executed. I think that somehow the movie knew it couldn't. It was really relying on the visuals and the audio visuals to the point where it was like afraid to back off of them, because if you did, there would be nothing there.
I agree very much.
And okay, that's what I wrote. The emotional tone of the film is made stale by the constant droning of the soundtrack, which ironically is fucking great.
I have not listened to it on its own.
I really like the different like musical moves that Charlie XCX is doing. It's foreboding, it's dangerous, it's sexy, it's erotic, but in its execution, it's just overdone. In Andrea Arnold's, the visual language of the film is very textural. It is like about the earth and like being in relationship to the land. And it's a really quiet film. And we're stuck in the same sort of emotional tone in that movie as well, which is dread and longing and repressed desire. But it knows what the fuck it's doing, for lack of a more intellectual way of saying that. Like, it understands every move that it's making. In many parts of that movie, all we hear is the actual sound of the moor. So it'll be like the sound of the wind. And then when the music does come in, it's very sparse and a lot of piano, and they're playing like they're sort of like the same lick. And I wonder if this movie was trying to do that, but it just didn't know how.
Well, okay, I feel like the thing I want to immediately say in response is about the movie's approach to sex, but I feel like we have to talk about characterization before I do that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
So maybe we could move there and then we can circle back. Because before we get into characterization, I'll say this. When I talk about not really being bored, especially in the first half, I think the film is most emotionally interesting when it is trafficking in that longing between Kathy and Heathcliff. And I really understood the longing as a type of grief, which I'd imagine Andrea Arnold is also doing well. And then things shift and the dynamics shift, and we'll get into that later. Characterization. I wrote this down.
Almost all of my notes.
I don't know where you want to start.
Characterization, and I just called it inconsistencies. I didn't even talk about emotional logic. I was just like, this done, but this don't make any sense.
Which character do we want to start with? I feel like we should start with Heathcliff or Kathy, but I don't know. Because the movie feels rooted in Kathy's perspective, but the movie also feels, the movie's gaze is on Heathcliff in this very specific way.
I mean, I guess I started with Kathy. That's
Okay.
first who I thought to write about. But
Okay.
I don't know if that means anything.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We can start there.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Kathy, who I should mention is played by Margot Robbie in this movie. I forgot to list cast members when I did my synopsis.
yeah.
In case you didn't know.
In
Margot
case you have
Robbie.
somehow avoided.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like fucking dude. This is what confused me about the whole movie. You know what I mean? Okay. So the inconsistencies in characterization, just read as inconsistencies, not complexity. And I think the movie wants us to read it as complexity, and it is not.
That is very well stated.
Thank you. So I think these characters, so this is just, I'm giving a general overview of my thoughts, is that these characters, they're not complex, they're inconsistent. I actually think they are flattened by, and by that I mean to, their most primal sexual desires, rather than allowing those desires to create a sense of dynamism in the way they are in relationship with the world around them. So that is where I'm coming from when I say the things I'm about to say.
I'm on board for all of this.
Okay. So, Kathy, at the beginning of this film, you used the word psycho. I used the term. I said, I think we're led to believe that she's like this burgeoning sociopath.
Yes, I considered, and I have not studied enough to really know all the fine distinctions between sociopath and psychopath. I considered saying sociopath instead of psychopath, and I was like, maybe that's too harsh. So I changed it to psychopath, but I was thinking sociopath.
Okay. I love that there was a thought process there. Because when you said psycho, I was like, should I have said psychopath? Because my minor in psychology that I graduated with from 2013, it doesn't remember those distinctions. I think at the root of that, though, is just this understanding that we're meant to believe that she potentially has the inability to experience empathy. So she's excited by the sight of this hanging. I was on board for that. This movie is going, okay, this helps describe, because I hadn't really thought about my reaction to it. And I used the word disappointment when I was describing my initial relationship to it. And I'm curious about that. So that's what I'm trying to work through right this second. Tangentially, is that my disappointment was, like you said, this is a very adult book. I know this isn't a book. I know this is the movie. But these themes are adult. Regardless of how we want to depict or think about the relationship between the book and the film, thematically, Emerald Fennell is pulling from the book. I feel like that's true overall, or at least trying. She's trying to. And it felt immediately dark and yet unserious. And I just wasn't on board with the unserious nature of the film that it was trying to sell to me in those opening moments. I'm not exactly sure why. I feel like we'll just figure it out as we talk about it. But anyway, so we're meant to think she's crazy, psychotic. We don't get the follow through with that. I don't think. I think towards the end, it's unclear to me if she's lacking in empathy or actually very capable of it, because the reason she chooses not to be with Heathcliff, when she's like, no, can't do this, is because he's like, I will kill Edgar. I will kill him and then we can be together. And she's like, you have degraded me. I knew you would, but I didn't know it would be like this. And now we can't be together. Okay, that's the line you're not able to cross, is murder, which makes sense, I guess. But then why present her as a character has more or less no character arc in terms of her maturing psychologically, which Kathy's character in general, like the spirit of that, even from the book, is that she is petulant and immature. I just have a hard time with it because nothing feels purposeful is part of my problem. And I don't know if I'm meant to believe that she has this moment where she's like, no, I can't be with you if you're willing to kill this man who did nothing wrong. If I'm meant to believe that means she has somehow grown up and become capable of empathy in a way that she wasn't when she was younger. But there's no actual evidence of that kind of character growth.
Right. And then the very ending complicates that with the implication we're supposed to be is that she allows herself to die because of Heathcliff being like, okay, you don't want to be with me anymore. I'm going to marry your de facto sister-in-law. And then she's like, oh, okay, I'm going to stop eating. And I'm not going to tell anyone I had a miscarriage. And I'm just going to waste away in my bed until I die from sepsis. My takeaway of the characterization of Kathy in this movie is that in some ways she feels closest of all the characters to the novel's characterization of her because she rarely comes off as sympathetic. She's very prideful. She's very selfish. She's very petulant. She's very immature. She is not softened in the same ways that the character of Heathcliff here is softened. So in that way, there were like moments when I almost, like she made me feel bad for Heathcliff in moments when I didn't necessarily expect to. And I found that interesting. Your point about what is this arc she's supposed to be going on. There are moments when the movie definitely is trying to telegraph her having grown into a more empathetic person. But I think it doesn't work. And the thing I'm thinking of specifically is that about halfway through the movie, Isabella is all excited because there's going to be a hanging. And at this point, Kathy is married to Edgar and she's integrated into their household. And Isabella's like, well, didn't you hear who it was? And the way she says it, you can tell Kathy thinks it's Heathcliff. And you see this look of panic cross over her face. And then Isabella's like, it's a woman. And she's obviously being very perverse about it because they're living in this culture where you don't have anything to do. Oh, the afternoon's suddenly exciting because someone's getting executed in the town square. But that moment is more about Kathy having a specific feeling for Heathcliff, not having a specific feeling for the dignity of human life. The main thing about Kathy and Heathcliff's relationship, particularly in the novel, and then parts of that get carried over here, is that it's just about it's very possessive. And I think the movie's characterization of Kathy posits her as taking the lead in that possession because when Heathcliff shows up, when they're children, she's the one who tells her dad, oh, he'll be my little pet. And that language is incredibly condescending and conveys a type of ownership over him. And she clearly never gets over that because even though she decides to marry someone else, she can't handle the fact that he's like, okay, you know what? I'm out of here. And then when she breaks off their affair and he's like, okay, I'm out. I'm going to go marry your sister-in-law, which he does to make her jealous. She's like, oh, I guess I'll deliberately sabotage my health so I die. Even when the movie's presenting her as having these emotional, empathetic strides, it's still like all about her. She comes off to me in this movie as quite unsympathetic. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that's what the movie entirely wants. I think the movie thinks she's going through an arc that she's not actually going through.
I 100% agree with that. And the moment, like the reason I pointed out, like, why the fuck is this this is what's going too far for you is Heathcliff's suggestion he would kill your husband if you tell him to. That is totally in line with her actual character, though, is that she would love the fact that she has so much, quote unquote, ownership over Heathcliff that she can say, murder my husband, and he will do it. And if, you know what, we'd be having a very different conversation right now if the movie had just gone there. Like it never just allows itself to go all the fucking way with anything in any direction. And I find that frustrating.
I thought about that exact thing. But then I was like, wouldn't that just be the plot of that one movie we talked about on, I think we talked about it during our Portrait of a Lady on Fire episode, where Oscar Isaac has an affair and he kills Tom Felton. Yeah, like then I'm like, it would literally just be that movie instead, which leads me back to my argument just about how generic and superficial, by stripping the screenplay of most of its resemblance to the novel, you're just left with this very generic period romance drama, which I can get behind. I love that kind of shit. But if the plot trappings of it are going to be pretty generic or tropey or whatever, then your actors need to be bringing real chemistry heat between the two of them. And I need to feel an emotional connection to them and their story that just isn't here. I had a response to this whole, when they're having sex and Heathcliff is like, I would kill your husband if you told me to. I think he would be willing to do that for her. But I was also, when he first said it, I was like, oh, he's just saying this because he thinks it's going to turn her on in the moment while they're having sex on this dining room table. Because the movie tries to establish this, I don't think BDSM is the right term because they don't fully go there, but that there's this level of kink between the two of them that leaves Kathy sexually unsatisfied with her husband because her husband isn't willing to engage in sex in that way. And so I was like, oh, he's just saying this to get her off. And then she takes it literally and is like, we must break up. I could be totally off base, but
I wouldn't put it past a film for like, maybe there's an element of that. I think that he meant it, but what if he did just say it as like in the moment, like this is gonna, and then she freaks out and he's like, well, shit, she's being kind of an asshole now. And I just said, you know what I mean? And now then he's like, you know what? I'm fucking out. We're both fucking out. I don't know. I guess she was the one that broke it off.
And yeah, and I guess maybe my impulse to read it that way, in a way that's more generous to Heathcliff, is because of the way the movie softens his character so much. Or softens probably isn't the right word because he's still a temperamental crybaby. It's more that he's sanded down. He's not outwardly evil the way he becomes in the book. Is there anything else you want to say about Kathy, though, before we unpack that?
I think that moves really seamlessly into Heathcliff.
Okay.
Especially because my first line about him, it just says he is not a villain in this film. But I also think the movie wants us to think that at parts, that he's like villainous. And I do think the word soften, it's not quite right, I guess, but it's not wrong. It feels true. I think.
I think the reason I'm drawn to that word is because he exhibits these moments of softness that I personally cannot be immune to. At the funeral, when Kathy's father's funeral, and she's standing and she's in her black, gown and veil, and she has her hands clasped behind her back, and Edgar, her husband, is reading from scripture, so he's standing near the burial site, and Heathcliff comes up behind her and he just sort of wraps his hand in hers. He like reaches out to hold her hand, and it's not super fluid. They're really grasping for each other, and I was like, this is such Marin bait right here. You know how I am about hands. I have a thing about hands as like the most, they're just capable of so much emotionally. And I was like, okay, for that 5 seconds, I was so in its swell, And there were these little moments like that. Like, I just cannot be immune to Jacob Elordi making sad faces. That I was like, why do I feel more for this character as opposed to Kathy? And it was confusing.
I wonder, I'm just thinking right this moment, like, I want to go back to hands too in a second. It'll be very brief. But it's confusing because I don't know what the fuck the film wants us to think, okay, about any of these characters. Honestly, like I'm confused by it. Overall, I think I've already said it. It thinks it's doing things. It thinks there are character arcs that there aren't. But so like we have Kathy, who initially is framed as a potential psychopath. And then we have Heathcliff, who is softened into this man who, you know, there's real tenderness there. But then in the end, he's the one who's willing to murder and Kathy's the one that's against it. Which I think feeds back into like, even looking back on the film, I have a view of Heathcliff that is more forgiving because he's just a nicer guy. Because there's that moment. And then, of course, like a moment that I would think will be like iconic is when he grabs her heel from under the bed. These little moments like that, moments of tenderness that feel like profound, that feel like they're really going somewhere. Where I'm like, okay. I got it. You got it. And then just drops a fucking ball.
Yes.
Over and over again.
Yes, I think, and this will get into some more thoughts I have about the aesthetic choices. There are so many things in isolation that when I think about them, I was like, oh, that was so affecting. Or that was so striking. But then when I take a step back from it and I try to contextualize it within the whole of the movie, it becomes vacuous. And that's really disappointing.
If I just wanted to have a great time with this movie or just have a terrible time. Like, I would just love to be able to come on here and be like, I sort of hated this, or I really like this. And instead, I just feel okay about it.
It's a shrug.
Yeah. And I just thought I would have a stronger reaction one way or the other.
I get what you mean. I think we're in the same boat. And there was something else I wanted to say regarding, when you were like, I don't know what the fuck this movie wants us to think about Heathcliff. I think that the movie, the POV is centered in Kathy, but the gaze is centered on Heathcliff. And I think the movie is envisioning an audience that is mostly interested in also gazing on Heathcliff. So when he is acting much more tenderly towards Kathy than book readers will expect or whatever, I think the movie wants us to fall in love with him alongside her. And it's trying to give him an arc that justifies that. And some people will think that that is because that's such a divergence from the source material. It's a total betrayal to the spirit of whatever Wuthering Heights is. And some people are content to just watch that. But by making him softer, you also are making him less interesting. And I'm not trying to advocate, it's so fun to watch a man, a male character become an abuser and torment people for decades, which is what happens in the novel. But that is saying much more compelling things about human nature and cycles of abuse. So I think Emerald Fennell was just always putting herself between a rock and a hard place by deciding this was the direction she wanted to go with these characters.
No, that makes sense. And I want to go back to Andrea Arnold. I do actually think there's a softening of Heathcliff in her adaptation as well. But a lot of that softening is coming through the very fine-tuned and well-executed characterization of him.
Is her adaptation like this one and like a lot of them only focused on the first half of the novel? Does it get into the second half at all with the second generation?
No. I would say overall no. Kathy has a brother in it. So like Hindley is there.
Okay.
He has a son.
Okay.
Who you do see grow up into this feral kind of child. But Kathy doesn't have a child.
Oh, okay.
So Heathcliff ends up buying Wuthering Heights. And we get the sense that he has decided to remain there because it's where Kathy has lived and died, and that's been his entire life. And she touches on that, and that in a way.
Rereading the novel so recently and right after watching this movie, I was really struck by there are these moments of immense tenderness between Kathy and Heathcliff. But in the book, it's mostly when they're very small children because they're both dealing with abuse and they are each other's whole world because there is no other world for them to explore. And then that becomes something more tempestuous when they become young adults and Kathy decides to marry someone else. And I would argue that Heathcliff really doesn't become a total monster until he marries Isabella. Because he marries her to deliberately torture her and to torture Kathy. And then proceeds to spend the rest of his life abusing the children of Kathy and his wife, his own son, and Kathy's brother's son. And so the second half of the novel is just him inflicting the violence and harm that was inflicted upon him when he was a child. So I understand the impulse when you're adapting this book to only focus on the first half, end it with Kathy dying or whatever, because then we can just like ignore all of that. So I wasn't really holding all that in my brain when I was watching this movie and watching Jacob Elordi play Heathcliff, because I hadn't reread the novel. It had been years since I read it. And so now, having recently reread it, I feel like if I watch this movie again, just knowing that that future is in the atmosphere technically, though not within the world of this film, because we don't have Kathy's brother, we don't have Heathcliff having a child, we don't have Kathy having her child. The movie just ends. It just, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Neither does the film.
Maybe there, that's my out. That's my out. That's my out.
It just ends.
It just ends. And I really think it comes down to, I would feel like the ending earned the pathos it's going for if Kathy's characterization had been more independent from the novel the way Heathcliff's was. Because I don't know, but then I'm also stuck psychoanalyzing, like, well, why am I? Because Heathcliff does bad things. His whole marriage to Isabella, even though the dynamic is totally changed, where he basically asks her consent to marry her and gives her the foreknowledge that he doesn't actually love her and he's just doing it to make Kathy jealous. So I'm like, why am I giving that more of a pass than the things Kathy does? And I'm like, is that because I'm a woman operating under patriarchy? And I think Jacob Elordi is very handsome. So I was like, let's just look at it, you know? Do you get what I'm saying? When you try to think too hard about it and really parse it, it breaks my brain. And I feel like that's because the movie is too hollow for this parsing that I'm trying to do. Not to be like, oh, I'm too smart to talk about this movie.
No, I think that's valid. And part of the fucking issue is that, I'm sorry, what is Heathcliff's fucking wound? I get that he was treated poorly by their father, but so was everyone. He was an alcoholic. He was addicted to gambling. They did have a difficult childhood. I understand that. And Heathcliff was an outsider in that he was just brought home and then he wasn't treated the same as Kathy. And there's some of that there. But again, I think the film really fails to show us the class discrepancy. And I think that's where taking the racial element out of the story really honestly makes the whole fucking thing fall apart in this adaptation specifically.
Yes, I would agree with that, because a significant part of the novel, and I say this mostly for people who maybe haven't read it, is that Heathcliff is constantly racially otherized. People are always commenting on the darkness of his skin and his features, and they're equating that with his lower economic status, but also his temperament, and this is why you will always be bad, and people seeing him as having less humanity because of the combination of his race, his appearance, and his economic background. And this movie just wipes that away. So you're left with this very stock class divide romance. And it's just very generic.
But it's also confused because They literally share a bed as children. Like they're living in the same spaces.
Well, he's sleeping in some barn attic that has a fucking hole in the roof.
Well, but she joins him all the time.
And she joins him.
But we get a sense of like decay of the whole property. And obviously it decays more and more as the film goes on, but still from the beginning, which is part of like the Gothic element there. I think it just could have been more effectively illustrated that there was a class divide. I just don't think that it was enough. Like, yeah, he sleeps in this sort of.
Because I feel like in an attempt to make Kathy perhaps more sympathetic, they pose it more as, and it is this way in the novel, but I think maybe it's more pronounced in the movie, that she has to marry Edgar to secure her financial well-being. It's ultimately good for the whole family, the whole Wuthering Heights, if she marries Edgar, because then some of that money can funnel. I can then send money to my dad and we can try to make this place better, which ultimately helps Heathcliff, and I can bring him up in his station. And that conversation, a conversation to that tenor does exist in the book, but when reading the novel, I don't think we're supposed to think Wuthering Heights is as decrepit, at least in Kathy's childhood, as this movie wants us to think it is.
Which I think is what makes it confusing. That we're meant to be like, oh, Heathcliff, poor Heathcliff, he's just an orphan and he's poor. And it's like, this whole family kind of is having a hard time, though. There's still a class distinction, but.
And we don't see Kathy be physically abused the way that Heathcliff is in the book. Well, because, and that's also where it becomes complicated by removing the brother character, because in the novel there are two children, Kathy and Hindley, her brother, and then the dad brings Heathcliff home, and the dad is kind to Heathcliff, and that is what makes Hindley, the brother, jealous, and Hindley is the main proponent of abuse towards Heathcliff, particularly once the dad dies and Hindley is then in charge of the household. So that dynamic is entirely erased and it's all funneled into the dad character instead. But because we're not dealing with the nuances of this intergenerational relationship and this sibling dynamic, it is uninteresting.
Well, because, and then I would say that's it, the abuse is further just funneled back into this very somehow plotless, plot-driven romance that we get in this movie, because because Heathcliff lies for Kathy so that he is beat. It's not that the dad is targeting him. It's that he puts a target on his back to protect Kathy, and that feeds back into her like love for him and reinforces the idea that she has some kind of ownership for him. Like, he will do anything I want.
I think that's an important thing to mention because, and this goes back to Kathy being less sympathetic to me in this movie than Heathcliff, because a moment I keep thinking about in a negative way is when they are now young adults, because the scene you're describing where Heathcliff lies so that only he gets abused and not Kathy as well, that's when they're still young children. Even as a child, he has this conception of making sacrifices for this girl, presumably out of love and a desire to protect her. And then there's this scene when they're young adults, and this is before Kathy gets married, so they're still both living at Wuthering Heights, and they've matured physically. There's obviously a vibe between them. And Kathy puts these fucking eggs under his blanket on his bed, so that when he sits on them, he can't tell the eggs are there, but then he sits on them and they crack and then there's egg all over his mattress. The way the movie is framing it is it's supposed to be erotic because there's these runny yolks all over his bed and we get this close-up of his hands covered in the egg yolk. And it's clearly trying to be sexual and build this tension about them coming closer together sexually. And I don't think it's successful in achieving that because her doing that to him And especially considering this class divide that exists between them, it's just such a cruel, childish thing to do that it was turning me against her in that moment when I'm supposed to be wanting them to be closer together. Because I'm like, you guys are fucking grown up now. This is not cute, childish shit anymore. You should know better. And especially, he's been forced to sleep in this shitty, decrepit barn while you at least get to sleep in a house. It pissed me off. And so it's a moment of the movie, I think, again, being confused, where it's trying to telegraph this one thing, but it's so unsuccessful in it that it swings backwards and actually makes me more annoyed rather than intrigued. And obviously that comes back because when Heathcliff and her reunite after he's been away for years, he puts eggs in her bed. And again, I wasn't seeing it as erotic. I was like, good, you're getting your revenge. Like, good for you. She deserves that. Am I being too harsh on her?
I don't think so, because she's an adult when that happens. As I was watching those scenes, like when he puts her up in the tree and then she gets back at him by putting the eggs in his bed. As I was watching, I was like, why didn't this scene happen in childhood? Why are you acting like this, Kathy? It's just kind of like mean.
To me, it's emotionally stunted.
Yeah, which is true to Kathy's character, even in the book. But it's uninteresting to see her do that as an adult. Even if this film had been like, okay, let's cast teenagers. If an 18-year-old was doing that, had responded that way, that would at least like make sense to me. But you can't choose an actor like Margot Robbie, someone with that level of recognition, and then expect us to not be like, okay, we're going into this knowing Kathy is in her mid-30s. You know what I mean? Like, right. You can't divorce the character from the actor playing it at that point.
Yeah. I'm trying to see the time on the thing.
Yeah, it's at 1:24.
Okay. Because there are other characters to talk about, which I feel like maybe don't take as much time. Because this really is the Kathy and Heathcliff show.
Yeah.
The way this movie is framed. But I do feel like we have to talk about Nellie and Edgar.
I actually don't have Edgar on here even. I have something to say about Isabella, or at least the dynamic between Heathcliff and Isabella.
Let's do that, because since that's more related to Heathcliff and we were just talking about him.
Okay. I actually have like 2 more things to say about Heathcliff.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So one of them, I want to use... This is from an annotated edition of Wuthering Heights, edited by Janet Gezari. Sorry, I didn't look up how to say their name. And there's a quote in here. The way that Heathcliff's character is described, I think, is just good. I don't need to give a fucking precursor to it. Okay, so I'm reading the quote. Heathcliff is, of course, human, but then so are vampires. In their way. Long before the vogue for vampire mashups, Leo Bersani observed that desire in Wuthering Heights is essentially vampiristic. The lack that constitutes desire for Heathcliff and Catherine has little to do with pleasure or sensation. It is a hole in being, and it can be filled up only if other being is poured into it. And I feel like this, on some level and in some ways and in some moments, this film is doing just that to Heathcliff. Like, using Heathcliff, like the gaze is on him because he is this hole into which we are pouring all of Kathy's thoughts and desires and ways of relating to the world. And I think that's where you talked about objects in the film, but not being able to really say exactly what they mean or what they're meaning to symbolize. And I think it's because they are not necessarily, it's not really clear. I think it's just very cerebral and I know I'm getting kind of abstract here, but it makes sense to me. Does that make any sense?
It does. This quote you have brought in And what you're saying about Heathcliff makes me think of a quote I eventually want to talk about from an interview that Emerald Fennell gave, which I think honestly puts a lot of things into perspective. But I don't want to overshadow you right now. I don't want you to lose your train of thought, is what I'm trying to say.
The last thing I want to say about that specifically has nothing to do with any of this.
Okay.
It is that Bella's favorite book in the Twilight series.
I forgot.
It's Wuthering Heights. And I have decided that I'm going to try and somehow bring Kristen Stewart into every single episode we do this year. So that's my Kristen Stewart connection.
Love it.
Is that Heathcliff is vampiric. Maybe this is a distinction. So in the book, yeah, he is filling up this hole inside of himself. Whereas in the film, Kathy is the one doing that filling. And that's where the part of the confusion is, because it makes him like both a victim, but we're still meant to see him as a kind of villain, I think, at the same time.
Yeah. I think the movie wants us to think that they both equally have faults that contribute to why they can't be together and why they can't figure their shit out.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And the reasons just never...
And I don't think it succeeds in that because of, like I keep saying, she comes off as less sympathetic than him. Okay. Maybe now can I bring in the director herself,
please,
for a minute?
Please.
This is from a profile of her that was published in the Los Angeles Times. It's written by Emily Zemler. There will be links to all this in the show notes, so if you want to read it yourself, you can. So I've pulled some quotes from it. Emerald Fennell's adaptation of Wuthering Heights could only have been created by a true fan. The British filmmaker wanted to evoke her youthful experience reading Emily Bronte's 1847 novel when she was 14, which she describes as, quote, the most physical, emotional connection I've ever had to anything. Her bodice-ripping, visually sumptuous version in theaters Friday incorporates some essential literary elements, but also imagines what's in between the lines of Bronte's writing, including sultry moments between the protagonists. Okay, and then here's another quote from Fennell later in the article. I care so deeply about this that I couldn't hope to ever make a perfect adaptation because I know my own limits. End quote. What she could do is make a film that recalled the visceral feeling of reading the novel as a teen. Quote, that would mean it had a certain amount of wish fulfillment, end quote. The novel is famously austere, with glimmers of physical intimacy. Quote, the Gothic to me is emotional, and it's about the world reflecting everyone's interior landscape. This is my personal fan tribute to this work, end quote. So, Miss Emerald Fennell is on the record as having said this stuff. So I don't think I'm being condescending in saying that the reason these things that we're talking about is because when she was 14, she read this book and didn't fully grasp it. It's emotional violence and thematic heft, which is fine. I wouldn't expect a 14-year-old to. So the reason we're like gazing on Heathcliff the way we do, the way the movie does, is because that's how she gazed upon him when she was 14 and she wants to recreate that. That's literally what it comes down to. Maggie's making the most. And I don't mean to be rude, but if this is how you have been feeling since you were 14 years old, why didn't you just go onto Archive of Our Own or fanfiction.net and read and write Wuthering Heights fanfiction when you were a teenager, like normal teens did, and then by the time we became adults, we were like, oh, that was kind of funny that I did that I misinterpreted that. And it just stays this personal, private, anonymous thing on the internet. Why have we all now been brought into her baggage related to misunderstanding this novel when she was 14 and wanting to still bring that vision to life as an adult as this form of cinematic wish fulfillment? It's just very bizarre.
And if it had stayed in that space where it's just like the wish fulfillment of a 14-year-old's unspoken desires or whatever, then make it that and let it be unserious all the way through. Because I don't think that it is. I think it is trying to say things in moments.
I think even as an adult, reading between the lines of what Fennell is saying here, I think she still believes at its core that this is a story about two tragic lovers who just couldn't make it work. And that's such a superficial reading of the novel. And it also just ignores so much of the novel. The second half of the novel complicates that reading so much. The reason that the movie is designed so we feel sympathetic for Heathcliff is because that's how she felt when she was a teenager. And I just find that all kind of silly. That was your pitch to a major movie studio, and they were like, here's tens of millions of dollars.
Okay.
I feel like I'm being really mean. I'm sorry.
No, Promising Young Woman, I will fucking swear on my dead grandmothers. They're all dead, so I don't have anyone to swear on. That film is fucking phenomenal. It knows what it's doing, and it is executing it really fucking well. It really is. And it was so good. And then Saltburn came out, and I know we have mixed feelings about Saltburn, but honestly, after seeing this movie, I'm starting to wonder some things about Saltburn. I'm like, do you think you're, and it mostly has to do with the sexual politics of this movie in comparison to Saltburn, actually. But it's like she had this really fucking successful film that was so fucking good, and it gave her the license to do whatever she wanted. And Saltburn, I still think is a really fun watch. And I thought this movie would be the same. I thought I was just like going to have a good time watching it. But it was taking itself seriously while denying that it was taking itself seriously. Like a teenager does, actually.
And I don't like to throw around the word self-indulgent when I'm talking about art and an artist's relationship to their work. But she's out here admitting to the Los Angeles Times that this is self-indulgence for her. And I just think that this should just be private. This should just be private. You should have just worked this out privately when you were a young adult. Why do we have to make it this big act of public catharsis?
If this movie was just meant to be beautiful and visually stunning, I love that. Fucking give that to me. Plotless beauty. You know I'm fucking here for it. That's not what this was. It was confused.
And see, and here's the thing, because so many people, like, their entire personality is expressing rage about Emerald Fennell's entire existence on social media. I just think expending so much rage towards a person like her, it's just not helpful when there's other public figures we should have rage towards. To people acting like she's the fucking antichrist of filmmaking, that is not what I'm not in that bandwagon, and I'm not trying to drudge up that kind of energy by diving into this interview and these quotes that she has provided for the world. This illuminated a lot for me, these quotes, when thinking about Heathcliff specifically. Yeah. And that was why I wanted to put them forth. The thing with the gaze, also the fact that she cast Kathy as like the person to be playing Kathy is a 30-something blonde woman, which is literally what Emerald Fennell is. And in the book, Kathy is described as brunette. So I'm just saying, that all becomes very interesting. That, with the way the film gazes upon Heathcliff, all becomes very interesting when we have Emerald Fennell admitting to a major newspaper publication that this book is my personal fan tribute to the work and an act of wish fulfillment. So I think this adaptation is just about her being horny for Heathcliff.
Another Twilight comparison. That's literally Stephanie Meyer for Edward.
Yeah.
And if that's what it is, that's what it is. Why is Twilight so much more likable to me, though? Even with all its confused sexual politics. Well, the characterization, though, follows through with itself. I think we see Bella grow. There's character arc there. It's also like a series. There's more time for that.
Well, there's just, because it's fantasy.
And teenagers are playing.
There's so much, and there's actual teenagers. But because it's fantasy, it just, goes off the leash with its own world building, so it can just do insane things, but be like, this makes sense because it's all a fake world. I get to decide the rules. You know what I mean?
Where I think in moments, Wuthering Heights was entering that space. Like, I'm thinking specifically at the moment with that huge strawberry thing that Kathy's eating, right? It felt very like Alice in Wonderland to me.
Yes. But then because that's one of those moments where I remember it. I think of the image and I'm like, wow, that was such an odd, striking image. But what is it trying to convey to me beyond here is this odd, striking image, and I cannot come up with an answer. And that is how I feel about a lot of the images in this movie, especially in the second half when she's at the Linton estate.
So Candace Woolley, who taught at our MFA program. Anyway, she has a Substack called Bimbo Summit, a Pop Culture Study, is what her Substack is called. And she just makes a list of like 21 thoughts she has about Wuthering Heights. And one of them, she says, Wuthering Heights is not a house. It's a mind, or maybe a childhood memory of a mind. The very best thing about this film is how it keeps turning the world into psychic architecture. And I feel like that description, it's like psychic architecture, where maybe that's what I was saying about Kathy is just able to pour herself and pour these images into Heathcliff in this way that is nonsensical. Sometimes when I go back on this film, I'm like, well, okay, but Kathy is petulant and there is this lack of growth, and maybe it comes down to, does the film doing that intentionally? And I don't think it is. And maybe that's like my ultimate issue with it. I don't know.
When I think back to those types of images and the just pure ostentatiousness of the Linton estate, the most surface level read I could offer of that is that it's trying to convey something about this family and Kathy's existence there, in contrast to her existence with Heathcliff. That existence with Heathcliff is soulful and it's all consuming, and this is beautiful but empty, or tacky, or garish, or whatever word you want to use. But then that reading feels at odds with how Edgar and Isabella are characterized, because Edgar is a nice, generic man. He genuinely loves Kathy in this movie, and he wants the best for her. And Isabella similarly adores Kathy and looks up to her as this big sister figure. And literally the only time Edgar loses his temper is after he finds out that Kathy has been having an affair behind his back while pregnant with his child. And he doesn't even call her a whore or send her out of the house or try to publicly shame her. He just is like, you can't see him anymore. And I think he was being kind of reasonable, if I may dare to defend him. So that is at odds with the aesthetic world around him. And I can't possibly think of another thematic read of the production design choices of that household beyond the one that doesn't make sense with how the characters in that household are rendered.
I agree with that. I really wanted to like this movie, though. Just be able to like have a good time and bask in its aesthetics. And I did try to do that. And there were moments where I could. But then there were moments. Oh, can I say my last thing about Heathcliff?
Yes.
So you already mentioned how Heathcliff's relationship with Isabella, the sexual nature of their relationship is consensual, right? He asked for consent. He's like, listen, I will never love you, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, okay.
With the implication being that she gets off on being this debased, submissive person in their dynamic.
Yeah. That's where I'm going with this. I don't want to overlook the fact that she is seen self-harming prior to their sexual relationship. and the obvious infantilization that her character embodies, her obsession with ribbons, how naive she is, like the dollhouse. Yeah. So I think the film understands that they are on some level working with the Lolita kink here. That's how I read that. She is very infantilized. This is a Lolita kink, which made me think, obviously, of Vladimir Nabokov's novel Lolita. If you're not familiar with it, it's a pretty iconic one. It's just a novel about the grooming and I say it's just, but it's a novel about the grooming and kidnapping of a 12-year-old girl named Lolita, and it's written from the point of view of her abuser. And the opening sentences are very famous because the way that they turn and because of their playfulness. And I'm gonna read like a sentence. I'm gonna read a couple sentences, okay? And I'm going somewhere with this. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lolita, the tip of the tongue, taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lolita. She was low, playing low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. Beautiful language. This is a pedophile talking about a 12-year-old child. Okay? And I feel like the film wants from us to relish in inventiveness and beauty of its visual language above any sense of moral clarity, but it doesn't rise to the occasion. And primarily that is due to the inconsistencies and flattening of all of the characters in it. That is how I view this relationship between him and Isabella, and the film as a whole. Yes.
To use this word confusion that you have been bringing into the conversation, which I think is a helpful word. The movie does stick to the book in that when Heathcliff returns and he's had his glow up and he's rich, and honestly, I kind of thought he was more handsome with his long hair and his beard in this movie. Whatever. And he's this eligible bachelor. Kathy is married and Isabella isn't. And the movie makes clear that Isabella is interested in him romantically. And the way the book unfolds is that Heathcliff takes advantage of that, marries her under false pretenses, and then she's married to him and realizes that he loathes her and doesn't give a fuck about her and is just doing this to torture Kathy. So the movie is doing this have your cake and eat it too situation by having Isabella still feel that way towards Heathcliff, but then trying to undo it or to make that less painful for her by having it be like, well, she's still getting something sexually out of it. So it's okay that her emotional desires are being ignored and unfulfilled. So I'm like, what are we trying to say then about power, about love, about sacrifice, about sex? Then what are we trying to say? And in trying to make Isabella, quote unquote, more empowered in this movie, it's somehow having more disregard for those emotional feelings she has for Heathcliff when she first meets him. And I'm like, why are we doing that? But I don't think the movie has any clue that it's doing that.
When you're dealing with these kinds of theme, I didn't want to do this, but it's making me think of Miller's Girl a little bit. Don't talk to me about power and desire if you aren't willing to really understand what you're saying about it. Sometimes I'm like, well, why put it out there at all then?
Right. And I would say I hadn't thought about Miller's Girl at all. And I would say as a whole, Miller's Girl feels like more of a mess than this movie.
Agreed.
But I think the Isabella character specifically in this movie Because also, the movie ends and Heathcliff and Isabella are still married. And Kathy is dead and Heathcliff is grieving over her dead body. And the feeling we're meant to take away is that, he's going to love her forever. And they'll be together in the grave one day. And maybe then they'll finally know peace. I don't know what's happening with her. I just think if Emerald Fennell wanted to make a period romance with sex, she should have just created an original story. Because I think that's what her 14-year-old wanted. Is she wanted the social pressure and longing and restriction that comes with the social mores of 200 plus years ago with sex. That's what 14-year-old her wanted. So if you just want to make another version of Bridgerton, then you should have just done that rather than adapt this. But I bet a studio was like, well, we need IP to make money. Because if you say it's Wuthering Heights, then there were a lot of elderly people at my screening.
Also, I saw it at the Grandin, so...
Okay, that's where I saw it too.
I saw it on the Sunday.
Okay, I saw it on Saturday.
So it was like, well, we went to church. Let's go see Wuthering Heights.
And I specifically wanted to see it there, not just because that's my preferred theater, but because when I'm there, the audience tends to skew older. So I was like, I want to see this in a crowd full of people who are older than me. And they seemed really into it. I heard people laughing. I heard people crying.
A lot of laughter.
I heard, because there are moments when the movie is trying to be absurdly funny. When Kathy goes to visit her dad's dead body and there's just a mountain of empty liquor bottles in the background. That's clearly trying to be visual humor, but it's so tonally inconsistent. So yeah, the old people, they showed up because they were like, it's Wuthering Heights.
Yeah. And that, the film, like the poster, I feel like is timely for that, like an older generation. Yeah. I didn't laugh or cry during this movie.
I didn't either. Though I felt water did not come out of my eyes at the end, but I felt if the movie had just been a few percentage points more effective, it might have.
In that final scene, I was grappling so hard with the fact that I was like really captivated by leeches crawling up the wall behind her and distracted by the fact that, okay, if this is about depravity and desire and danger and all these things, why didn't he fuck her dead body?
I knew you were about to say that.
I could tell in your eyes you knew I was about to say that. But I was like, this is what I mean, where I'm like, I just wanted this movie to go all the way in one way in some direction, or just let at least one character go all the way and be unleashed inside of their desires. If anyone, if that is true or almost true for any character in this godforsaken comparison, it's Nellie.
Yeah.
And she's also the most complex and intellectually intriguing, I think. But why didn't he just have sex with her dead body? Why didn't we just get that?
Well, this is where I feel compelled to talk about the inclusion of sex in this film. Though I do want to talk about Nellie before we finish.
Yeah.
So where would you like to go now?
I actually don't have a lot to say about Nellie. We can maybe just get through it really quick.
Okay, that's fine.
Mainly, it was just that I felt like she was the most, or perhaps only, like, dynamic character because of her relationship with Kathy, and she really does give in to her most primal desires, which really are just different ways of making Kathy's life more miserable, which simultaneously makes her life better because she's put in a different social class by that association. She's basically the reason she ends up marrying Edgar. She ends up like saving, quote unquote, Isabella from Heathcliff, though. So it really, I think, like highlights the fact that Kathy is her enemy, which also brings into question, were we meant to view their relationship as consensual if we're also meant to view Nellie as saving her from Heathcliff in the end, right? To bringing her home,
Right.
Did she need to be saved or not? Was this consensual or not? And then in the final scene where Nellie's crying, she's like, that was a bad move. That was bad on my part. And Kathy's like, you didn't mean it. And she's like, I actually fucking did, but I feel bad about it.
Yeah, I think here's what I'll say about Nellie is that I think of all the changes the film makes from the original source material, the ones with Nellie are the most intriguing. For example, having Nellie be more of Kathy's peer than in the novel. Kathy is still above her in station because Nellie is this paid companion. Nellie has to work to live. Kathy just gets to exist and do whatever the fuck she wants. But they're presumably more closer in age, and being a companion versus being the paid nurse the way she is in the book, that dynamic is just different. So it feels more logical then that Nellie would have this particular resentment towards Kathy and Heathcliff and all of their drama, because she's that person who's just stuck watching their exhausting dynamic her whole fucking life. And she can't escape because if she leaves, she has no way to make money and survive. So, like, yeah, she's going to be resentful and meddle and fuck it up. And because I was particularly frustrated with Kathy throughout most of this movie, I was like, yeah, Nellie, good job. And the other change that is interesting is that in the movie, after Heathcliff has married Isabella, he's still writing Kathy these letters, wanting to see her. And Nellie, rather than giving them to Kathy, burns them. And in the novel, she doesn't do that. She just gives Kathy the letter. And they see each other one more time before Kathy dies, which in the movie does not happen. And I think the movie makes that choice to try to villainize Nellie to an extent that we then feel the intended pathos of Kathy dying before she can reunite with Heathcliff, and Heathcliff coming, and the movie ending with him crying over her dead body. But that doesn't work out as intended on me specifically as a viewer, because Nellie proves to be perhaps the most dynamic character in the whole movie. So even though she did something cruel in the end that separated these two people who loved each other, I'm not fully against her for it because of the prior characterization that was happening and the way the dynamic between the three of them was established. Which again goes back to the word confusing. Confused.
Precisely. I do want to mention too that the actress playing Nellie is Thai American. So she is racialized in a way Margot Robbie, Jacob Elordi are not in American culture. This is an American film, right? Not or Western.
It's distributed by Warner Brothers, which is an American studio, but Emerald Fennell is British.
Right.
Jacob Elordi and Margot Robbie are Australian. So I don't. Yeah. The studio financing it is an American studio. So I would say it's an American film. Yeah.
But anyway, all I'm trying to say, I am tempted to investigate why Nellie's character in the film is played by a Thai American actress. And so therefore she is racialized in a way that the white characters are not. But Heathcliff is stripped of his quote unquote racial otherness under white supremacy. But I don't think that the film kid gives a shit.
I think the movie is trying to. I think. I
feel like I had to say it. You know what I mean?
I'm glad you brought this up. I wanted to talk about this too because yes, Nellie is played by the actress Hong Chow, and then Edgar Linton, the man Kathy marries, is played by the actor Shahzad Latif. He is Pakistani British, so they are both people of color. But the movie is not interrogating those characters' races. So I think Emerald Fennell was like, well, I'm already doing these anachronistic things, so I might as well just do race-blind casting. But I can't have Heathcliff be not white because the conception I had of him when I was 14 years old was a white guy, even though the text literally has people calling him racial slurs and whatnot. So it's like, you don't get to do both. Yeah. And worth noting, Emerald Fennell is a white woman also, in case that wasn't obvious. I think both of those performances are good.
Agreed.
And I do think Nellie is the most interesting character in this movie.
Yeah.
The generous word, I think, to describe it would be misguided. But I don't think that generosity is necessarily warranted.
I agree with that.
Do you have it in you to talk briefly about sex?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. At the very beginning of this episode, I made reference to a moment when I felt, what is the exact word I used? I said there is a precise moment when its momentum absolutely craters and the emotional logic of the movie never fully recovers. And the moment I am talking about is when Heathcliff and Kathy start having sex. Up to this point, I'm already sort of like, this movie is pretty superficial, but I'm not enjoying myself. I think this sense of longing is decently enough rendered that I can sit here and watch this and it's fine. And then Heathcliff comes back and he's at first, terse and rude and all these, because he's just trying to show her that I made my way without you and you made a huge mistake. And then they have their conversation. They clear up the miscommunication between them and they kiss in the rain, but they don't have sex then. They have sex when he comes to her window in her home because she and her husband share separate bedrooms because, it's the 18th century or whatever. And he comes to her window and he comes in and they're about to fuck. And I was ready. Okay? I was like, I feel like we have built up adequately enough to this that I am here to watch these two people get it on. They're both very beautiful. Their chemistry is fine. This could perhaps actually prove to be a pivotal moment of catharsis. And you could maybe sell me on this being a love story if you do this right. They're like lying on the bed and they say that they love each other. And before even like clothes come off, it fucking cuts away. And instead what we get is a montage of them having sex. But we're not actually really even seeing them having sex. It's more implied. And I was like, oh, the movie has totally misread what it is trying to do here, or what it thinks it's accomplishing. And I attest that this movie would be significantly better if there had been a single sustained sex scene that unfolded in real time and allowed and created space for some kind of emotional arc to be happening between these two characters via sex. But the way it is, where it's just this montage, it's like, oh my God, they're so horny for each other. Here they are fucking in all these different locations and it's in secret. It comes off more as lust to me than love, which feeling lust is fine. If you're just really horny for someone and there's not a lot of emotional baggage involved, that's fine. But that's not what this movie wants us to think is going on. And in that moment, it revealed to me how profoundly uncurious it was about the emotional and connective power of sex between two people. I argue that it needed to be interested in that and convey that in order for this romance to fucking work, and it totally shit the bed. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm out. Over. I'm done. Okay. It's your turn now. Because I was really going and gesticulating and I wanted to make sure you knew it was safe. I was done.
I was gonna wait. They don't get to fucking, and we're like an hour in.
Probably over an hour.
Mm-hmm. And so I actually started thinking, oh my God, is she going to really try to sustain this longing and that longing as grief throughout this whole film and they're just never gonna fuck? I was really starting to think that. And I was like getting interested in that. I was actually more interested in not fucking than in him fucking at that point.
Well, because they don't fuck in the book.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, okay, this is where she's going to stay true to the text and really try to sustain longing into grief, like through like this confusing visual stimuli. Okay. Like she's pulling me back in. And then we get like this like Rocky Balboa, whatever the fuck, like montage of nothing, basically, of like some heavy petting.
Yeah.
And even when we got to that point, I was like, okay, at least like the emotional tone has changed a little bit here, because that's when I really started to notice I was in like a droning state of like something needs to happen. Jesus Christ, something fucking needs to happen. It was like the rest of the movie where I just thought, oh, we're so close. Oh, I thought we were going to go there.
I think the no sex route could have also worked.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if it had been, they had sex one time and we really spent time in that moment with them, and it was this incredibly emotionally powerful experience and fully restorative to their connection with each other. If we had really gotten to sit in that with them, I know
I'm sorry, I'm laughing.
Maggie's laughing.
Keep going.
Then, and that was all we got, and we just got that one taste of it, and then it all gets taken away because miscommunication, and she dies and he's not there to say goodbye. Think of how much more impactful that would have been then.
Yeah.
And I ain't ever directed a movie in my life. That is not where my skills lie. But even I was like, this was so obvious. If you're already taking all these liberties with the text, this was so obviously the lane you should have picked, and you couldn't fucking do it. Even though you were kind of marketing the movie on this idea that it was going to be more sexual than any other adaptation was.
Yep.
What is your thought that just came to you?
I'm sorry, the laughter came out. I was trying to hold it in. It was just something stupid that popped into my head where I was like inserting the sex scene from The Housemaid into
it needed to be it would need to be better than that.
Yeah. But that scene knows that it's meant to like, it knows what it's doing. It's like, okay, we're establishing this emotional connection between these two characters, and then everything's going to fucking fall apart. At least they went all the way.
Right.
In that sex scene, even if I do think it was giving The Room.
Yes, because you had issues with some of the positioning of bodies, if I remember correctly, right? Which I did not notice that, but I trust.
I think it's because it felt like Evie Magazine coded, where every time they were in a room together, she would like climb up on him like a spider monkey. Like she was just like so small and tiny, and he was just so big. And then the sex positions also like really emulated the sense of like he's very physically powerful and she's just a blonde with big boobs. And I felt like there was some flattening of her agency.
Interesting.
There. But I would have taken that over what we got.
Yeah. I guess the word I'm looking for is intimacy.
Yes.
Is that we needed the sex, if you're going to include it, to bring in a new level of intimacy between these two characters. And it didn't do that. And if the point of your movie is that, oh, actually they just had like unresolved sexual tension and they just need to fuck a few times and get it out of their system and all this drama was for nothing. If that's the point you want to make, then fine. But that's not the point you're making, as evidenced by the ending of the film. You're wanting me to think that there was this deep, soulful love connection. I wanted this movie to be for a younger generation. I wanted the sex in this movie specifically to be for a younger generation what the sex scene in Cruel Intentions was. I know that scene is complicated by the film surrounding it, but that is what I wanted.
Cruel Intentions, baby. Yeah. Have it just be like this iconic moment, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. I'm witnessing this. And
yeah, I was also thinking about Heated Rivalry while I was watching Wuthering Heights. Have you watched Heated Rivalry?
I haven't.
Ace and I watched it. I quite like it. I haven't engaged with any of the internet, whatever about it, because I know some people are being really weird.
Really? What are they
Like
saying?
shipping actors in real life and prying into people's real life sexual orientations. But there's been a lot of talk about that show because it doesn't shy away from sex. And the thing that I found so revelatory about the sex scenes in that show is that a lot of them, especially early into the series, well, one, they do chart this emotional dynamic between these two characters, because the arc of the romance in that show is that they meet when they're like teenagers and they have a purely sexual, like, we hook up when we see each other relationship, and then that gradually evolves into actual adult love. So you see how the emotions of the relationship mature through sex as they get older. And I think that's very insightful. And when I was watching some of these scenes, I was like, why does this feel different to me? And I realized it was because so much of them take place in real time. There's like very few cuts. There's no cut to black. There's no montage-y editing of the bodies to show sex. You're seeing it just play out in real time. And I realized how rare that is. But it has it creates such a powerful emotional component, because you're watching these people change as they have sex, because you're actually watching them have sex. Obviously, it's simulated sex. It's not real. I was thinking about that while watching Wuthering Heights, because I was like, this movie needed to take a similar approach, I think, in order to earn its ending and to be saying something interesting, if it wasn't going to be saying the same things the book was saying.
And that's making me think back on Saltburn, where I know we disagree on this. We don't need to get into all that. But I do feel like overall, like, that film's like not really trying to say anything serious. Whereas I think my problem with this one is that I think that it is. It just doesn't know it, or just doesn't know what that is. And that's where I've said that a bunch of times, but I'm just frustrated by it, because there were so many moments of potential. Oh, can I say one more thing about psychic architecture?
Sure.
This phrase I'm borrowing from Candace Woolley. Because I think that Andrea Arnold is actually doing that in her adaptation of Wuthering Heights, specifically with textures of the moor. It's very hair-like moss and hay and animal. And also, because Heathcliff is played by a black actor, we get close-up shots of like his hair and like her hair. And it is psychic architecture that we can actually connect back to the class and race divide, which is directly addressed in that movie as well. They don't just have it existing there and then we're supposed to grasp at these symbols and, hope for the fucking best. No, she's like really clearly saying something. And so I think for me, where some of the visual language is falling short, because it is untethered from me being able to connect it to something profound. Comparing the two movies, I think like there are like so many actual like similarities, but one is just much more successful in its execution.
Alrighty, well, better luck next time to whoever decides next to adapt this novel.
Yeah.
What does this movie make you want to tell your younger self? We've said so much already.
We have said a lot. I don't know. I wonder if like my teenage self would like it.
I feel like a lot of teenagers will.
I think that.
And then that makes me wonder, sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead.
That just makes me wonder if there's going to be this broad reclamation of it in 20 years when all those teenagers are adults.
Oh.
Because it's been getting very mixed reviews.
Yeah.
When that cultural conversation inevitably happens, I will just have to be like, that's not my problem. I don't need to concern myself with that.
And some people are liking it. And if I have seen like a few comments here and there, like on Instagram when I go on once in a while now, where people are like, when you like capitalize something and lowercase it and capitalize and lowercase to convey this is a person saying this and they're stupid. It's like people typing in comments about on reels of, influencers talking about how much they loved it. Like, it's not the same as the book. And it's like, you're missing the point. That's not my problem that it isn't the same as the book.
Yeah. And I think people who act like Emily Brontë would be rolling in her grave knowing that her book has been adapted in this way. I did see a comment it said, Emily Brontë died of tuberculosis and this movie is still the worst thing that ever happened to her. I get you're just trying to be pithy for likes on social media. But, like, she was a real person and we do know real things about her life, including multiple hardships she endured, like the death of her brother. This does not need to be that serious.
Yeah.
And also dying of tuberculosis is a really, really terrible way to die.
Mm-hmm.
And also, maybe this isn't valid, but Emily Brontë died before knowing what a movie was also. So if you were like, this is what your book is now, she would just be confused.
That was my first thought.
More than anything.
She'd be like, what the fuck? The fuck is this? My younger self, I think, would have liked this movie.
And that's cool.
She wouldn't have been looking for... She would have actually probably seen it as plotless. And she would have felt... But which I stand by. It's like a plotless, plot-driven movie. That's part of the confusion. But she would have actually seen it as plotless, which she was, you know, down for. And also would have thought that adults like me talking about the film in this way were just pretentious and have spent too long not being a teenager to understand what is fueling our desires. And isn't it amazing that an adult woman was willing to make her art about what her teen self most wanted? I'm like arguing with my teen self right now.
I absolutely would have had that argument when I was 17.
Yeah.
Because when I was 17, I was like, well, obviously I know what it's like to be an artist because I am also one.
Mm-hmm.
And now, a decade later, I do not have that same conception, but it was okay that I probably would have at one point.
And if I had encountered this film as a 17-year-old, 37-year-old me would be like, I'm going to stand up for it because of my relationship to it when I was younger.
Right.
So,
but
it's just not where I'm at, though. And so it's not my interpretation. And yeah, I don't know. Weird, right?
Mm-hmm. This movie makes me want to tell my younger self it makes me want to tell her that she was right in savoring that Cruel Intentions sex scene because who knows when we're ever going to get another banger like that again.
Nice.
Since this movie I thought could maybe go there and did not.
Nice. That's good. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Rate, review, subscribe. Positive feedback helps us. We have an Instagram called @GirlhoodMovieDatabase. Do we post things there anymore?
No.
Not really.
I'm on the fence about if we're going to or not, but we are there.
It is there.
And I do check the DMs sometimes if you just see. I haven't for a while, but
be sure to subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. Turn on post notifications because this primarily just exists as a podcast. So if you are interested in us and what we are doing, the best way to do that is to subscribe to this podcast and tell a friend.
Yeah.
And we will see you next time. Episode topic TBD.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about it yet, but hopefully it'll be something that brings us joy.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, take care of each other. And fuck ICE, fuck Donald Trump. Sorry, I don't know if this is appropriate to just tail this on
I
at
think
the end
it's
of this
important.
episode.
In case someone listened to all of that and for some reason was like, are they MAGA? Or, you know?
Yeah.
I think that we should all be saying fuck ICE, fuck Donald Trump at every turn we can.
Yeah. Okay. now
Well,
now it's somber. Oh, this is
it.
such a mess. But
so is this movie.
Take care of each other. Take care of your community. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. Stay strong.
The end.
The end.
Until next time.
Until next time. Bye.